Professor Eric Martin again, welcoming you to another World History 101 chapter setup. This time we're looking at the Worlds of History, chapter 10 on the First Crusade. Now, in terms of this chapter, the thinking historically part is focused on getting us to think about some of the pros and cons of history as narrative. And what you want to do is think about, and we talked about this on the very first week of class, but you might not remember, thinking about different types of history. Frequently the term history itself is used to mean a number of different things. And in this particular case, when we're thinking about history as narrative, that's history as storytelling. History is storytelling, and that is a little different than history as social science or analytical history. It's a little more interesting sometimes, right? Because stories are fun to hear, and lots of times that's what gets us interested in history, is we like to hear a good story. But one of the problems with a good story is frequently a good story makes sense, even if it's not true. A good story frequently makes sense, even if it is not true. And that's the thing you have to remember about history as narrative, is that sometimes we can get sucked into the story and the storyteller, built it up block by block, right? And based on this, then this happened, and then this happened, and therefore this was the cause, and this was the effect, and it all sounds good, whether it's true or not. Okay, that doesn't mean that all narrative is not true. It's just what you have to keep in mind. Now, what we have this week are a number of different narratives telling the story of the First Crusade from different points of view. And your main mission, you got two missions. One mission is to analyze each and every narrative this week, right? And the other mission is to come up with your own narrative about what you think happened. So I want you to go through each of the documents, paying close attention to, based on the document, what does that author say happened? It will be very useful, as usual, for you to know who these authors are. Look up your authors, describe who they are in the threads. I got separate threads for each document again this week. Describe who the author is and why they're writing the document. And keep in mind that for the material this week, when we get into the, who was involved in the Crusades, we've got material written by Roman Catholics, Western Europeans. We've got material written by Orthodox Christians out of Byzantium. We've got material written by Jews. We've got material written by Arabs, and then we get the twist there, right? Because we're dealing with two different kinds of Christians. We're dealing with Jews, so maybe we got three different European elements in here. And then we got a couple of three different Muslim elements involved as well. We've got the Turks, we've got the Egyptians, and to some degree we've got the Persians involved as well. And the thing to keep in mind about all this is it's important for you to look at the names, because while the Turks are Muslim, the Persians are Muslim, the Egyptians are Muslim, they don't necessarily all like each other. And so what happens when war in Jerusalem opens up some power vacuums for people to try to move in on. That becomes the big question. So it's a grand story, right, of what happened during the First Crusade. Why was it called? What was it about? Who called it? How did it all take place? Do you see different story? So the Siege of Antioch is one of the stories that will be told a couple of different times. Are the stories that are told fundamentally different? Do they disagree on the facts, or are they just kind of told differently? So it's a fun chapter, I think. So go through the chapter, read each of those documents, get a sense about how each of those authors tell the story of their element of the First Crusade. And then come back to the main discussion, all right? And I want you to, how many different stories of the Crusade do we see here, this First Crusade? And based on what you've read, what do you think the story is? And then I guess the grander, question after you've done all this for the conclusions, I'd like to see a little bit of commentary that involves whether or not you think this encounter between the Islamic world and the Western world 1,000 years ago has any relevance for understanding the 20th century. Anyway, that's your mission. And until next time, give me a phone call. Come visit me here in the office. Send me an email if you need to talk with me. And enjoy your historical studies.